to order and ask that we begin our meeting by pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I apologize for being a little late. I said we had an interview for the accountant's position and ran a little longer than we thought.
The town accountant?
Town accountant, yeah. Joanne has retired. She's done a couple weeks ago. And we had 3 or 4 applications that we interviewed a couple weeks ago that didn't work out. So we're still looking. We're short right now in the accountant. We interviewed a candidate, as I said, just at 5:30. So it's still a process of trying to fill that position. So we might find that maybe a report we're looking for might be late, or we can't get a hold of the information we might be looking for at some point in time. So we just have to keep in mind that our assistant accountant is certainly aware of what we're looking for, and but we have to give her some opportunity to get used to us. Move along. So first agenda item is approval of the minutes of October 11th. That was our last meeting before the special town meeting. And you've got your minutes.
Did you send those to us? Because I looked through my email and didn't find them.
Yeah, I thought I sent them.
Does everyone have them?
I don't have my phone with me, so I can't tell you.
I don't have a copy here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we'll,
You want to put it off?
let's pass it till,
Let's put it off
Next
and
meeting?
just make sure everybody's had a
Okay.
chance to review it, yeah. I thought I sent it last week when I sent 2 or 3 different items, but could have possibly missed that. All right, so let's just postpone that, and we'll add that to the agenda for our
All
next
right.
meeting.
It was in one of the other emails I just
Was that,
looked. You did send it.
again?
Yep.
Okay, well, good. We'll still put it off, but,
we do have the minutes from October 24th, prior to the special town meeting.
right, they're right. Mo did the minutes for October 24th, which was a very short 5-minute meeting. So we could approve those minutes.
I would make a motion to move those.
All right, motion made.
Second.
By Mr. Delane, seconded by Mr. Quartz. And any questions or discussion? This would be for the short meeting we had right prior to the special town meeting. Hearing none, we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. O'Keefe?
Abstain. I wasn't in attendance.
Right. Mr.
Aye.
Aye.
Delane?
I wasn't there either.
Okay, and the chair votes aye. So there was 2 abstentions and 3 in favor. So 302. Okay, year-to-date reports. I don't know if it's an issue, but at the end of October, we're 4 months into the new year, so about a third of the new year. And granted, water billing and sewer billing isn't a monthly issue, it's a quarterly issue. But we're at about 22.5% overall of revenues for the water department, and I think 19% for the sewage department. So it's something we need to keep an eye on, because it would seem as though right now it's trending a little slow, given where we are. But again, a lot of that might have to do with just the timing of the billing. It's done on a quarterly basis, so really what we're comparing it with is about 25% of anticipated revenues in that area. Any questions or comments about year-to-date reports?
Just one comment, Tom.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because the school cycle is different than the town cycle, but the Monty Tech assessment is 50% of the, full year's amount that has been paid out already. Yeah. And as you said, we're a third of the way through the fiscal year. The school year, I assume we're less than that, since
Right.
they don't begin till.
I think we pay that on a quarterly basis. So we're probably, and I'm guessing it's a quarterly upfront. So the first 25% would have been paid, in July.
Okay.
And the second 25% in the beginning of October, probably. And it looks like there hasn't been any adjustments to that assessment. I mean, last year there was some adjustments, I think, as there was a fewer kids that went, so we got adjustment in terms of the tuitions. All right. Anything else, any other questions or comments about the year-to-date reports? All right. Hearing none. Appreciate the town manager taking some time this evening to join us. I had gotten a report from Joanne before she left. I know I sent it to you all. And it's got very small font. So, I do have, if you didn't print it out, I do have a couple of copies here that has equally small font. So it's not going to be any easier to read, but if you need a copy of it, send it down.
Yeah, thank you.
So Mr. Solzback has come to speak to some of this. If you remember, one of our goals this year was to try to include in each of the agenda items each month something that brings us to take a look at past actions of the town, really. In this case, capital expenditures. I think I had also put down the audit recommendations. I'm going to suggest that we put that off to the next meeting. But the purpose of it really was to try to get updates on where we are with some of these projects. Having been on the capital planning committee and Mr. DeLay representing the finance committee on the capital planning committee, you spend some time making decisions about which projects to fund, and then it's sort of, that's it. The recommendations get made, they go to the warrant, they get voted on, they get passed or they don't get passed, and you assume everything just kind of falls through and takes and gets done. And as we've noticed in the last couple of town meetings, that projects that we've approved some money for often come back to us with needing some more money because it didn't get done yet, or the inflationary cost of, we didn't allocate enough money the first time around. So the idea of kind of taking it upon ourselves to go back and say, okay, what are the financial articles that the town has passed, and kind of appoint ourselves to keep an eye on those articles and see where they are. So that's how we got here. And if I understand, I tell you, I miss having, town accountant Gogan retiring, because she was very good at helping to explain it. But there are a number of projects, go back 3 or 4 years, that some of them are on the school department side, some are on the town side, that don't appear to have been addressed yet. For example, the school water deletting equipment. I can remember that probably about 3 years ago. That was approved as part of the capital spending. We approved $21,869, and that's still the balance in that account. So it means nothing has been purchased in terms of deletting equipment. At least that's how I would interpret that. Is that a fair interpretation?
It is, and as Ed mentioned, on the school side ones, unfortunately, I'm familiar with a good handful of them, but not as intimately as familiar as I am with the town side project, so bear with me on some of those. But I do believe you're interpreting that correctly, and I think this list could probably be cleaned up a little bit, because there are some that are on there but just flat out closed out, that are showing no balances in one direction or another. But Mr. Chair, I think you do hit the nail on the head. I think it's a habit, and it's not just here, but in every municipality, where there's this big push to get things through at a town meeting, and then they kind of sit, or there's a change in leadership, or something happens and people don't really follow through, they forget about them. And so it is nice to go through these from time to time. The Capital Planning Committee is going to be meeting in December or early January to kick off their process for this upcoming fiscal year, and we're going to be going through this exact process, trying to go through there and clear some of these items up. But I think a good takeaway, at least from what I've seen in my time here, or a good anecdote for our capital projects and how they're moving along, is after the most recent special town meeting, I was speaking with a resident who I won't name, and we were listing off, how busy of a summer it was and all the things that we got done. They said, "Yeah, well, you haven't gone around to that town hall roof yet, huh?" I said, it's like, have you looked around town? So sometimes it's a capacity issue, and I think in particular in the past year or two, the delays that we're seeing in terms of available materials, but also available labor, has really been a killer. And I refuse to use that as a crutch. I think a lot of people kind of throw that out as a catch-all, as an excuse for everything. But some of these projects we have put out, we've received no or limited response. One bidder, which I'd always prefer to have at least 3. If it's 2 for a smaller job, I'll say all right, because at least gives you one reference point. But for some of these jobs, some of those delays are because we just flat out can't get people to do the work. Now, with the passage of time, as you also touched on, Mr. Chair, we're seeing rapidly escalating construction costs. So it's to our benefit to try to do these as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, I think that's part of the concern, is that a project gets explained, it gets approved by the town, but it hasn't been started within the next year. And I realize that with COVID, or since COVID, we're dealing with supply chain issues, dealing with labor shortages, dealing with a lot of issues. And that projects that haven't been done are probably a legitimate reason why they haven't been done yet. I think we just need to try to stay on top of it. That's the key to it, is that someone asks the question, saying, when is, we appropriated money for X, Y, or Z, Where are we in the process? Is it anticipated that we're going to be doing it? I mean, one of the questions I've got, obviously not for you, but probably for the superintendent, is on some of those projects, are they still in the works? Or did they pick them up on ESSER grant money? You know, they might have found some other funding sources for the need, in which case, you know, we can free this money up.
And I think another component for some of these that kind of stick out to me is, you know, I think some of these projects have probably gone a little longer than we'd like. I think some of them, it's not that they're not getting done. I think it's that there's the perception that they're not getting done. And what I mean by that is something like the old Murdoch, for example. People say, well, what are we doing with the old Murdoch? We funded that in May 2021, and now the tarp is blowing around. What are we doing with that? We haven't started that. But I've probably logged about 150 hours on that project. So I think it's also the understanding that it's not a matter of like, okay, we get you know, $1.5 million, and then I go out in the street and hold it up and say, well, someone fixed the clock tower. There's a process that we have to go to or go through, and a lot of it for a project of that size, just use it as an example. Given the dollar value of the project, by Mass General Law, we're required to secure an OPM, an owner's project manager. That's a several month-long process, and we do have an OPM on board for that project. Once we have an OPM, we have to get them settled in and familiar with the project. Then we have to go out on the process to hire engineer and architect. Several more months you go through that process, and I'm happy to report for the old Murdoch, we do have Russo Bar Associates from down closer to Boston, who are now getting familiar with the project. A few more months go by. So it goes pretty quick. So while we don't necessarily see people up there slapping mortar down and putting down courses of brick, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to get us to that point. And then, you know, the architect and engineer, it's going to take them about 6 months to actually drop the plans. Then we're going to have to put them out to bid. They'll be out to bid for about a month. We'll get the contractor, but the contractor doesn't give a low bid, take the job, and say, all right, we'll be on site on Monday. We'll see you there. They have lead time to get their materials. They have to order. They have to wrap up whatever job they're working on then. It's probably going to take them 2 or 3 months to even mobilize to get there. And so pretty quick it went from, you know, hey, we appropriated this thing in May of 2021 to saying, all right, well, now I kind of understand why they're not laying brick down yet. And that's kind of, I apologize, a long example, but I think that the behind the scenes aspect a lot of people just don't see on some of these.
Yep. Yep. So could we just walk through a few of these?
Yeah.
And we give a little update on them? I won't ask you about the school projects,
Thank you.
unless there's something in there you know. And I'm just going to ask about the ones that don't seem to have been started yet. And just to get an idea as to where we are in terms of moving those projects forward. So one of them, I mean, it's been started, but most of the money is still there, is the Ingleside Park Trail Project. It was $32,000 appropriated, and we've spent very little of it.
$290 to be exact.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good example, and I think some of these also, it's partly dependent on the funding source. So this, I believe, came from the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation. So if it's a situation where if we're hanging up or holding up borrowing capacity, if we're holding up free cash, then I'd say there's a little more urgency. If it's Robinson Broadhurst, that money doesn't turn back to our general fund or anywhere.
Oh, right,
It would go
right.
back to Robinson Broadhurst. So for that particular project, I believe that was awarded by the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation before the amphitheater project was even a glimmer in their eye. And so the intent of that project was to try to formalize and work on the existing trail system that's there that, you know, present day is fairly overgrown. It was backburnered a little bit as we went through the amphitheater project. That was one of the first ones I picked up when I got to town. It was stuck in permitting purgatory and couldn't get out of the Conservation Commission or the Planning Board. And so that was one of the first things I did when I got to town. I would imagine that when the amphitheater hits substantial completion, which we're going to see heading into the winter, and then it'll be mostly punch list items come April, that trail project is going to pick up again. We'll be able to turn our sights to that. And I think part of that also, another component that's worth mentioning is bandwidth, that I think oftentimes gets lost in this equation. And I have to remind myself of it from time to time as well, as I'm only one man, and I have a fairly limited staff, who, as an aside, go above and beyond and get a lot done around town. But when you have a list of projects like this and you only have a small core of people that have the experience in quarterbacking those type of jobs, then you have to start kind of picking and choosing. And so I think this is a good example for me personally, because I've done nothing with the trail projects. I've been focusing on that $4 million amphitheater
The
we're putting in.
amphitheater, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that, if you could help me out with the acronyms, the abbreviations on the left-hand side there, because if, I see RB, FC/RB, so RB is Robinson Broadhurst for that Ingleside Trail. What's FC stand for? Do you know?
Free cash,
Free cash, okay.
and then
Then the ban
APPR,
is like a 5-year,
yeah, 5-year borrowing. Yep.
5-year borrowing. Appropriation,
So I'm not sure what the difference would be between I mean, all of those technically are appropriations
Yeah,
regardless of the funding
yeah.
source. Yeah, I can ask on that one. Joanne and I have
Yeah, just-
we'll be having a call soon, so just can't let her go.
So you- and you spoke about the senior center, that.
Yep.
And the children's library project.
So the Children's Library project was actually a remainder from the library accessibility project. So I think it's more commonly known as Phase 1 of the library restoration. So when they put in the elevator and the work they did on the left side, there was a commitment to set that chunk aside for a children's library project. So that funding source was actually floated out last year, building our capital plan, when we were talking about potentially buying, was it 70 Pleasant Street?
Right, right.
Yeah, so now, those funds since then have been rolled in and will be part of the Phase 2 that we saw recently approved, for the library project. So that's the electrical, fire suppression, all of that work. And I mean, that, since we're on the topic, that's, I think, another good example.
Was that the money, I remember shortly before town meeting, it must have been right before the public hearing. There was some question as to whether there was some, what the number was that was going to appear on the warrant for the
Right.
library, because there was some money that you felt was available from prior, this project maybe.
But it was
maybe
already
this
spoken for,
project, okay.
yeah.
Okay, so that's where that money was
So
coming
that
from.
is that money, yeah, that $70,000 glitch that we had in advance of the special
That
town
we
meeting.
didn't have to ask for. Okay, good.
Since you brought up library, I have a question. The top section of this report shows library accessibility renovations, starting balance of $297,600. Looks like we paid down some of the loan, ending balance of $248,000. Then in the lower section, it sounds like it's the same project, yet the name is slightly different, Library Access Project. It starts with the same dollar amount, but the ending balance doesn't match the other ending balance. So first question is, are they the same? If they are, in the future, it would be nice if they name matched, because there's also 2 other library ones on here.
Yep.
We already talked about the children's and then Phase 2, but when you were mentioning children's, you were saying that was part of Phase 2. So naming convention-wise, it's getting a little confusing, but my question is, why is the beginning balances match but the ending balances don't?
And that's an excellent question, I think, and that's a good example, what I'm talking about when I'm saying this sheet could probably stand to be cleaned up, because there's a couple dead projects on here too, and things that have been closed out, so I'm not really sure, if this was run off a spreadsheet that Joanne was keeping, or it's not my list, so I don't quite know it as well as if you were to ask me to rattle through the capital plan. I could do that one with my eyes closed, but it's a fair question and something that I'll be looking into myself, because it's whenever you see
Knowing
something,
that you're also going through a change of staff for accounting,
right,
if you could sort of even just give yourself a tickler or Tom, maybe in 90 days, you know, revisit, revise, so that it includes the most latest information as well.
right.
Yeah, I had a little trouble just trying to figure out how to interpret, let's take that one, for instance, $297,600, whereas the other appropriations are in parentheses, so it's like a negative. Sort of like when we look at the revenue reports, you know, they're parentheses until their total's been raised, and then anything over that total is in a
Flips into the black.
on parentheses,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I didn't know if there was a significance to that, because it,
Yeah, admittedly, this is not my favorite
no.
spreadsheet here.
Really,
Yeah.
you know, and I don't expect that you're going to know all the ins and outs of the accounting aspect of it. I think really just to focus in on the projects and
speak to
where
the
we are with the
projects,
projects.
yeah.
I'm not going to ask you to explain it, but
I
when we get an
appreciate your
accountant,
grace.
it'll be one of the first questions.
That's a good point, Tom. I mean, the amount of projects we've seen in this community in the last 24 months. I mean, I've only lived here 16 years, but the prior 14 years, I didn't see this much progress happening in the town.
Yeah.
And to see, you know, a capital plan, this says, what, 30 different items? And how many more items got approved
Yeah.
2 weeks ago?
Yeah,
You know, I mean, this is tremendous for this community.
good point, Bobby. So the school retaining wall, the Council on the Aging Phase One, is that one of the Murdoch, Old Murdoch projects?
Yep. So, and that's another one that I think highlights another kind of potential pitfall that we have, and the library had a lot of it too, is a lot of these projects we don't really fund very cleanly. And so it's a matter of, you know, multiple funding sources appropriated in multiple different dates. And so like trying to go back into the number that we needed for Phase 2 for the library, for example,
Yeah.
took hours, because I'm going through multiple years, you know, different warrant articles, some that were amended on the floor because the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation came in at the 11th hour and, you know, gave us 6, and then we backed it down to 3, and some of it we're borrowing, and some of it's free cash, and you're putting it down, and it's like, you got a list this long for one project, and I'd like to try to get away from that if we can, whenever practical. Just for accounting purposes, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Now, I can tell you why that happened on the library accessibility project. Former head of our planning committee, John White, for years tried to get that project funded. And for years, he was trying to use CDBG, Community Development Block Grant money, and it would never get approved. And it was shortly after he passed that I sat down with his daughter. I'm like, can we just get this done now for John's, you know, all the effort he put in? And it's like, well, where are we going to get the money? It's like, well, we're going to go to lots of places. So literally, I'm the one that put together 4 different funding sources, you know, Robinson, a bond, the solar money that was supposed to be going into capital that will be again, and then appropriation out of that year's general fund. You know, and it was what we needed to do to piece it together at that time. But you're right, it's a lot cleaner if you can get a single funding source.
It is, or even just account for it better, and I think, because that's certainly not a criticism, and in fact, it's my recommendation for funding that water pipe. I just did the same thing 2 weeks ago at special town meeting. It's like, oh, we got this, because sometimes it's something so big, that's the way you have to do it. But just trying to find some way to track that better and keep it all in one central location. Like, kind of like this, but if it were better, in so many words. But I think that's probably something, once we get a new accountant on board, sitting down, and me taking the time to sit with them and putting our heads together and just laying it out better visually.
You know, when Bobby explained how, you know, the funding for that project came from so many different sources, it reminds me of the schedules that you put together on the water main. You're talking about funding from several different sources.
Yep.
That all of which are variables on top of it, so that's going to be interesting. So the town hall cupola,
Let's see.
are we-
Oh, you're skipping down there.
yeah, I've just,
So, well, there's a couple that, on here that we completed. It's like the Robbins Road Bridge. That one, we wrapped up about 6 months into me getting here. Big heavy lift from Brian Croto on that.
right,
The DPW septic and hot box is all set. Mellon Road, we just wrapped up this spring. Toy Town generator, I believe, is still outstanding, but I have to follow up with that on that. Central Street parking lot, we had some back and forth on what that actually was. I was talking with Brian about that today. We're not even 100% confident on what that one is. We thought maybe it could have been the one on Pleasant Street, but that was the Pleasant Street parking lot. I asked if it was the one that we own, that we share with the Clark and the laundromat, but it wasn't that one. So like some of these we have to go back, and it's, I guess, the risk of losing some institutional knowledge, but we weren't sure about that one. Grant design is an appropriation that we put in. I think the first annual town meeting I was at was the first time it went through.
right.
And that's just like some seed money to help us get grants, which we've had some success with. So Council on Aging Phase 1, Senior Center, it's just one piece of that. Beals Electrical, that's Phase 2 of the library.
That's a project that's going to be
About to kick
starting
off.
momentarily.
Yep.
Yeah,
DPW truck lease is closed out. So supplemental paving, that's another one, part of the paving plan, closed out. Town Hall Cupola, so that one, we're gonna go out to bid this winter. We were having some trouble with the architect, just trying to get some plans lined up for it. But I hit the brakes on it a little bit because Monty Tech might be interested in doing the work. They don't like to do things that were done before 1978 because you start running into lead and asbestos. So originally we thought, well, it's part of the original structure that's probably hot. But we learned after the fact that the one sitting up there right now was done in the 80s. That one is a replication, so it'd be safe for them to work on. The question that we've had in communications with the superintendent over at Monty Tech is the height issue and whether or not they can work on it. So what we're working with right now is with our architect, whether or not they could construct a new one on the ground and crane it up onto the roof to avoid that. So that's like, once again, another good example where everyone's kind of like looking at the cupola being like, are they gonna start yet? Are they gonna start yet? But it's hundreds of conversations behind the scenes that we're having and meetings that we're having with different players in town, trying to find ways to do it on budget or to find some way to do it at a lower cost. So that's a good example. So if Monty Tech can't do it, it'll be going out to bid this winter, and we're gonna have somebody right on it this spring, because I don't want to walk into annual town meeting with that not done. So that's my own personal motivator. So that one's on the list. The radio project, we just had a conversation with interim Chief Walski today, or acting Chief Walski. That one's wrapping up. That was another one that started when I came to town. The live scan was approved at the annual town meeting. That one's wrapped up. And Phase 2 library repairs, the same as the Beals Electrical, going towards the same thing. So we had a pre-construction meeting on that one today. So they're moving along, I think is the long story short here. And I think part of it is, an obligation on my part to, at times, try to do a better job to hit the pause button and communicate some of this to the community. The other piece, though, I think, and you all run into it as well, is oftentimes, no matter how many times you go to a public meeting and talk about something, it's always the first time someone's heard of it. Sometimes on the street when you're talking with them and you're kind of pulling your hair out because you've talked about it 6 times at 6 other public meetings. But I think the upcoming Board of Selectmen meeting is going to be a good one if anybody would like to watch, because we have an update on Beach Street on there. an update on the old Murdoch and an update on the library. So just making sure that people are aware of, the quieter pieces of these projects, like what we're actually doing, and sharing some of that.
All right, any questions for Justin while he's here? I think the idea of, us just sort of checking in, or if you're producing, a report, let's say the library, since there's been several phases and several different allocations of funding, just a one-page update as to where it's at, and that would be another way of keeping us informed, I guess.
They're usually sprinkled throughout the town manager's report, but it's at the end of the selectmen meeting, and people are usually checked out by then. So I think maybe even something quarterly where we can sit down and similar to this fashion and run through it real quick, I think would be useful. And, I think another part of the component is if anybody were to walk out this door, walk up Central Street, walk down Maple Street, and then walk down Ingleside into the amphitheater, and in one clean you can see what we've been doing in the past 2 years. So part of it's out there, and if you're missing it, I don't know how.
No, there's, as Bobby said, I mean, there's a lot going on in town. And it's not our role to be nitpicking. But when we're not sure where, what's being done or where the allocations have been, then we need to educate ourselves a little better. So that's the whole purpose of this, is not to put anybody on the spot. Like I said, there's always a reason why things don't get done when they don't get done, when you think they're gonna get done. And I don't think the public certainly understands the steps it takes to, once you get the authorization to do something, then to go out to bid and do the contracting and the timeline that it takes to get through, get to the point where a project is started even. So for us, that's what I think our need was to have a better understanding as to how that process works. So we have some idea of when we're behind or when we're just right on schedule.
And for the record, I don't feel nitpicked. I welcome the questions, and they're all good questions, so thank you.
All right. Well, then we appreciate your staying late tonight.
Cutting me loose?
Yep, cutting you loose.
Well, always good to visit, and I appreciate the work that all you do. I know it's a lot, and it's tedious at times, so thank you for volunteering.
Great, thank you. All right. So I'm suggesting that we wait till next month to ask questions about the audit. That way I can get the questions we might have out to the town manager before the meeting and see what kind of data we have in terms of following through on the recommendations of the audit. That's basically what the focus is. Committee comments, any comments? Let's say that Bobby and I went to the Association of Town Finance Committee conference that they had last Saturday, and it was very, very interesting. I don't know, Bobby, if you want to talk about we split up, so we covered all the morning workshops.
Exactly. There are two different breakout sessions, so we split the rooms.
Yep.
Tom has been attending these for years, so some of the sessions he had already taken,
Yeah.
such as Budgeting 101. But since I'm new to FinCom, it was my first time. Some of them were really drawn out. An hour and a half to talk about
OPEB.
OPEB. Whereas that same amount of time on budgeting.
Yeah.
But it was informative. I also appreciated Tom driving and an hour each way, conversing.
Yeah, it was, I know when last year when Adrian and Doug and I went, it was as much the time spent getting there and getting back that gives you opportunities to talk about things related to our job and things that aren't related to our job, just to get to know each other better. Yeah, I went to one on, the first one was the impact of climate change on cities and towns, and it focused on some grant programs that are out there. But it was interesting, that one of the speakers is from Williamsburg, which is a small town out in Western Mass, not Williamstown, but Williamsburg. And they're actually using their, they applied for a grant. They're building a public safety building to house their fire and police department. But they're using this grant for solar energy to put, I imagine, solar panels and provide themselves with a lot of electricity that way. Which wasn't what I was thinking of when I think of climate change, but of course it certainly fits in. And it was interesting to know that some of the grant work out there might say, well, what would we apply for this particular grant on, what would we do as a town to address climate change? But to see the flexibility as to how you could use that money to supplement something. I'm thinking of the fire station coming down the road. I don't know if there's been any talk about looking into solar to power the fire station. Maybe there should be some discussion around that. So that was kind of interesting. And then the second one I went to was on the role of the town assessor. And that was particularly informative. I really went to it because I know basically what the assessor does, but I didn't know much about some of the ins and outs of what goes on. And the speaker was very good. He was an assessor, I think, in Westboro. And he's a good speaker and had a good sense of humor. So if you're going to deal with assessments, good sense of humor doesn't hurt. So it was definitely well worthwhile. Really, as always, I'm looking at that Saturday and thinking, it's going to be 70 degrees. Beautiful sky, beautiful day. But it was worth it. It was worth it. All right. Any other comments from anybody on the committee? You all know we're looking for, we have a vacancy on the committee, and we're looking for, it's being posted. I know that the town has advertised it. It's on the website. But certainly if you know somebody that you think would be a good addition to the committee, you might encourage them to look into it a little bit further. And hopefully we will have a full contingent soon. All right, public input? Okay, hearing none, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, make a motion to adjourn at 7:18.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, thank you.